As I stood, picking up Tranos and slipping him into the sling that would keep him safe as he slept, I turned from the chill waters of the sea and looked towards the shore and island I was now on. Large 10 to 15 foot dunes of a dark hued sand covered the shore, with the tall canopy of a forest or jungle pointing out just beyond. Climbing the nearest dune to get a better view, I saw the edge of the tree line several hundred yards away, atop a 20 or 30 foot sheer rise from the sands. I could also see the dunes covered almost the entire distance. As I slid down the other side of the dune, beginning to make my trek towards the woods and the materials I would need to build a craft to get to the crash site, I noted a sound like molten glass cooling rapidly. I felt the vibrations in the sand just in time to dodge to the side in a smooth motion as the sand where I was about to stand flew into the air, launched by a wave of heat and the thing that created it. It looked like a worm made of dark glass, with ebbing reds and oranges filtering through. My punch landed in the center of its 10-foot long length as it was flying upward in its attempted ambush. As my gloved fist began to shatter into the glass flesh of this thing, I struck something far denser and more resilient than glass, and the full force of my strike, combined with the momentum it already had, sent the being flying in a high arc between the dunes. Before it had landed, and had a chance to presumably get back beneath the sands, I drew my sidearm and fired into it once. The gem-like round easily pierced the being's glass flesh, and on hitting the core, punched through with little difficulty. The sound when it did was not that of glass or metal, but of chitin or bone being torn through. The round exploding as it exited the other side sent the creature bouncing back, and I dove sideways into a gap between the dunes as it came to a stop, convulsing, some dozen or so feet away. Flicking my arm to shift a large, weighted slide on my sidearm, which would reload and recharge it, I stepped back out, only to rapidly empty the weapon's 3-round capacity, one into each dune and one between them around the creature. If I were lucky, it would be enough to bury the now convulsing corpse that was beginning to shed enough heat to melt the sand as it thrashed around in apparent death throes. As I sped back into the gap and again rearmed my weapon, I could hear the sand flowing down from the adjacent dunes, covering it in feet of sand. A moment later, an explosion of molten sand and metal was cast high into the air, and I slid to a stop and drew myself completely under my hood and cloak, placing my faith in the oarcloth and enhancements woven within to be enough to weather the falling results of the explosion. After a few long minutes I stood, the axe shattering a thin layer of still cooling glass covering me that had rained down from the explosion. My trust in my cloak was thoroughly validated. As I quickly climbed the nearest dune to assess things, I saw the crater of rapidly cooling molten sand left by the attacker's demise, and could only listen as the outer edges of the now glassy ground began to crack and suffer microfractures due to the uneven and rapid cooling. If it had not been for the motion at the tree line, I would not have turned to see at least 3 more of the beings flowing through the dunes towards me. Beyond them, the motion that caught my eye, 3 humanoid figures on the high sheer rise, waving, shouting, and motioning, pointing at the oncoming threats. As I reacted, dashed, and jumped from dune to dune, heading towards those trying to warn me, more of the creatures burst from the sands in an attempt to seize me, only missing me by the merest of moments. Nearing the top of another dune, and with only about 100 yards between myself and the rise where the humanoid stood, I spoke a word of power, and as I jumped, felt the pull of gravity cease, and I began to fly in an arc in the direction I had leaped. Basic levitation is normally limited in its usefulness. However, as it does not affect momentum, generally only gravitational drag, it could be used wisely to allow leaps in long, high, but shallow arcs, avoiding the attacks of these strange creatures while crossing the last distances safely. As I reached the top of my arc, I released the spell and allowed gravity to once again pull me back down, sliding down the edge of one of the last dunes before repeating the procedural jump once more, this time landing only a few yards from those that had tried to warn me. They were shorter than myself, and possessed a stout, strong build. The gray of their skin was covered in simple but well-made clothing. As I looked at them, the largest of them stepped forward and spoke. After some tense words, they insisted that I follow them to their village to meet the elder of their people. They seemed unshocked that I understood their words, and they mine. Of course, it was due to the enchantments and other enhancements I had on my gear, and while they ensured communication was possible, I was also learning their language as they spoke to me and each other. We first traveled up a lift, a small walk past the tree line into the woods, which was controlled from above, elevated high above the forest floor, and stopped at the end of a suspended high walkway in the canopy. Following it for several hours, we reached a high, hollowed-out tree with furnishings. My guides told me we would rest here for the rest of the evening, and set about preparing a fire and to make food. As they did so, I took the opportunity to look over the forest in detail, and allowed my mind to absorb as much information as I could. Based on everything I could tell, this world was not one that had been explored by the Pathbreaker Corp. The sands, with their metal traces, and beings the locals called shore sharks, along with the trees I had observed so far, did not match any world I was aware of on the record. Not to mention how wildly the local fauna deviated from standard known species types. Until I was able to get a clear view of the stars, I could not even be sure which sector I was in. But it did seem likely I had been translocated by whatever had struck my transport, as no system was nearby at the time of impact. Until I could escape, however, I intended to catalog this world and its people for further and proper contact by the realms once I made my way off. As a former member of the Pathbreaker Corp, I would be right at home on this strange world. By the 9 and 4, welcome one and all my perceptive patrons back to the library. In today's entry, we're going to take a brief look at the leading edge of the realm's exploration and expansion within their local area of space. That edge being known as the Pathbreaker Corp. As always, this is just going to be an overview of these explorers and cartographer of newly found worlds and systems. With that said, let's begin with the fact that the Pathbreaker Corp is an all-Praetor formation. This is significant as it means the full force of Praetorian iterative technological advances are on display and in use during the course of their duties. It also means that the ships that make up the Pathbreaker Corp are much smaller and with a much smaller crew requirement than any other similar formation. Even the Expeditious Defense Fleet, which is mostly made up of Praetors, features ships with a much higher crew per ship of equivalent sizes to that of the Pathbreaker Corp. For example, the standard craft of the Corps is a 150-foot, 4-deck frigate, and only boasts a crew of 5. 5 Praetors to run, maintain, and execute the duties of interstellar investigation and exploration. This has, however, proven to be more than enough, as the ships of the Corps are among the most advanced in the realms, with magical and technological systems assisting the crew in their duties. Also, the nature of Praetors allowed them to manage the vast amount of work with relatively little stress. This lack of crew also frees space for far more advanced and larger systems than would normally be considered for ships of their size. Thus, most ships of the Pathbreaker Corp, or any Praetor ship for that matter, should generally be considered 2, if not 3 classes heavier for estimations of its capability, be it speed, sensors, defensive, or offensive armaments or systems. Beyond the base ship, each Pathbreaker crew tends to have access to at least 1 transport capable of atmospheric and space use, 1 pilotable walker for on-the-ground exploration and assessment. Between these vehicles and the other tools available to the crew, it is expected that they will be able to profile over 95% of encountered worlds to a reasonable degree. A reasonable degree more than enough to give colonizers a fair idea of what could be expected if they were to try and set up shop on any planet that the Pathbreakers have profiled. It should be noted that the profiles are not exhaustive, and more exploration will need to be done before full efforts to colonize are undertaken. Survivability and general safety are among the primary concerns for the profile, with resources and other such concerns a distant second. Once collected, these profiles are presented first to the EDF's cartographers for verification as to its location, and then sending the information to the Council itself for them to figure out how the world should be recorded and further choices, being entirely on the Council and their politicking as to what to do with it. Recording of flora, fauna, metaphysical and geographical, as well as other features, and an evaluation as to any intelligent, sapient, or soon-to-be intelligent or sapient inhabitants are all covered within this basic profile. This process can take a matter of days or weeks, depending on the size and makeup of a planet. But between the orbiting vessel, the atmospheric space transport, and the on-the-ground walker, vast amounts of lands can easily be profiled in both short order and with extreme accuracy. As of the current day, the Pathbreaker Corp has discovered over 100 systems and more than 200 worlds that have been subsequently profiled. Their work continues to expand the knowledge and territory of the realms, as well as slowly ensuring that all the lost stars are found. As only once all the stars of the cluster that were lost when the home realm vanished all those ages ago are found, will the treaty and binding restricting the realms from exploring outside the Credelis sector be satisfied. This is the current overarching aim of the Corps, with preparations for further exploration efforts after the end of the treaty and binding already underway. With this quick look at the Pathbreaker Corp, the edge of the blade for the realm and its growth at its end, I would like to thank you as always for your time and your interest. My perceptive patrons, it means the realms to me. Thank you. Now, until you once more visit me in the library for another entry, by the 9 and 4, be well, take care of yourselves and each other.